So I don't think I have read enough books with older protagonists. Lately, I chose to do sort of a reading project where I read a book from 6 different genres that featured an older protagonist as the main character. And I'm just going to share with you some of these books, give so many reviews. Maybe by the end, you will have something to pick up as well. The first pick that I am going to talk about is honestly sort of the weirdest one, the one that doesn't fit perfectly in a way, because we're talking about a dwarf and he's more of a middle-aged dwarf rather than an elderly dwarf. All the other books that follow this are going to have elderly characters, not middle-aged characters. But I still want to talk about it because I really enjoyed the book, and that was Orconomics by Zachary Pike. The main reason you would want to read this book is because of the economic satire that the author does, and it's just so engaging and intriguing, to me at least, because I'm a little bit of a nerd. I like to think about how political structures and economic structures work to some extent. In this book, you have heroes that are commissioned to go on different adventures with the goal of getting more loot. The economic system is based on a loot-based system where you'll have these heroes go and attack shadowkin, which are orcs and goblins and kobolds, things like that. And the more loot they get, the better the economic system is. But over time, as these battles keep happening, the loot piles get smaller and smaller, and it's not a sustainable way to sort of have a growth of an economic system over time because of how it's set up. At the same time, a lot of these Shadowkin creatures want to become NPCs, which basically means that they would be given normal, everyday jobs where they're not enemies that steal loot, but rather just people who work in normal society. So there's a lot of things going on with sort of the economic system it sets up in the book, and that's just very much scratching the surface. But this is something that you would want to read if you like satire and if you like humor. There's a little bit of like really dry, almost academic feeling humor in here, and some that's a little bit less dry. There are some funny moments in this book. But in thinking about my project, there was something that I noticed in this book that isn't the primary appeal or reason people would read the book, and that is Gorm, who is like older, middle-aged, is retired. He's forced through a political reason to have to do another adventure and go on with this party to do something. It's all in the book. That's not the point. Anyway, he is jaded a little bit. He knows how the structures work, and he knows what they can accomplish and what they can't, and what exists for him and what doesn't. But there's another party member that is younger and youthful and optimistic and idealistic almost to a fault. And the relationship between the two characters, where you have someone who's been through things and actually knows how the world works a little bit and a little bit jaded, contrasted with youth and optimism. And I think in society we need both, and this book actually kind of had a little good portrayal of the concept of needing both. Anyway, I really liked it, so if any of that sounds interesting to you and you're willing to sit down with something that you kind of have to pay attention to a little bit, I recommend Orconomics. I'll have to admit this next one was my favorite of the 6, and that was my science fiction pick, which was Dissolution by Nichoas Binge. It's one of those books that is legitimately tempting to reread it immediately after reading it the first time, because you know that you're going to have such a different reading experience the second time around from the first time around. I know you have like an idea of what I'm talking about there. I don't want to like give spoilers or anything, but I almost immediately wanted to go right back to certain points in this book. This book follows Maggie, who is an elderly woman who has put her husband into a nursing home because it's been hard to take care of him with Alzheimer's. We quickly find out almost immediately that maybe her husband doesn't actually have Alzheimer's, but someone is erasing his memory because of something he knows. It's a science fiction book that is about memory. It's very speculative. It has a lot of philosophy in it, and it has a lot of like moments where you kind of have to think about moral questions. It does have multiple timelines. So in the present, we have Maggie, who is the elderly lady, but we have a lot from Stanley, her husband, in the past, specifically in like the 1950s and 1960s, as he begins working on some sort of research project that has to do with memory. It all comes together really well. In addition to being such like an engaging science fiction premise, and in my opinion, pretty well executed, there's sort of like this love story between Stanley and Maggie that you can only really have after 50 years of marriage. I'm not going to like try to oversell it as a love story because you don't read this for the love story by any means. But it's so nice to see sort of these two work together throughout the book in different ways, and I'm being purposefully vague because half of the enjoyment of this book is the twists and turns and the different reveals that might happen throughout the book. So I had a really fun time with this. I think it was a really good portrayal of older characters, and it made sense. The whole Alzheimer's memory loss thing was just really engaging, and I thought it was really fun. But beyond being fun, it also had a little bit of depth. So if you haven't heard of Dissolution, you should give it a try. My third pick is my thriller pick, and it's really just a fun one. I don't know if we're going to get very much depth out of it, but it's a page turner, and sometimes you just want a page turner, and that is Too Old for This by Samantha Downing. This follows a woman named Lottie Jones, who is a retired serial killer, but all she wants to do in her everyday life at this point is go to her church events with her friends and be there for her son. She's left the life of being a serial killer behind until she's sort of forced to confront it, and when she needs to figure out how to keep her secrets safe, she gets re-involved in her old life. It's honestly just a page turner. There's a lot of dark humor because anytime you have an elderly woman involved in these type of things and she just wants to be at church, it's going to be funny. There were many times where I was like, I'm gonna stop the book after this chapter, and then I had to keep going because there'd be little twists and turns. This was just fun. So if you're just looking for a page turner thriller and you kind of like the gimmick of them making the serial killer an old woman, it's really, really good. That being said, I will say that I think that it is a little bit more of a gimmick. There isn't like a lot of depth, in my opinion, but not everything has to be that way. My literary fiction pick was Olive Kitteridge. This was a Pulitzer Prize winner in 2008. It's a book of short stories that follows multiple characters in a small town in Maine. Most of the short stories are about someone who is older, and it's just a lot of slice of life, little snippets. One of them that had me thinking for a while is in one of the stories we follow an old man who has been married to his wife for decades. And one day she tells him, you know what, we're old, we're done, our life is behind us. I don't want to be intimate anymore. And it kind of goes through his internal processing of getting that revelation from someone he loves so deeply, but still he's not at the place where he wants to feel like his entire life is behind him. And I thought that was like a really interesting thing to kind of sit with for a second. It's definitely more of a reflective, slow, literary read, so you kind of need to be in the mood for that. And the fact that a lot of them are following perspectives of older people means you kind of have to be in the mood for sort of that existential feeling as well. I understand that's probably not for everybody, but it was pretty good. The name of the book is Olive Kitteridge because in every single story we have Olive Kitteridge show up at some point. Some of them are about her family and her life, but some of them are just about people in her town where she will always make an appearance. She's a retired school teacher. She's pretty intense, to be honest. She kind of has that reputation for being stern and for being mean and for being bossy. And that's always just an interesting portrayal of a woman, especially an elderly woman, because I think a lot of times we have the portrayal of ones that are really sweet, and this character just felt a lot more real because of all of the different situations she's put in, and her basically way of reacting is pretty consistent throughout all of the stories. So I appreciated it. It's definitely something more reflective if you're into more of the literary fiction feel and if you don't mind short stories. So for my next pick, I wanted to choose a biography. So I read Grandma Gatewood's Walk, the inspiring story of the woman who saved the Appalachian Trail. That one was a mouthful. And I wanted to choose someone who accomplished something when they were older, not someone who was reflecting on something they accomplished when they were younger. And I thought this was a good pick because she was the first woman who hiked the Appalachian Trail, and she did that when she was 67 years old. And then after, she goes on to hike it again, and then she also does the Oregon Trail, which is like 2,000 miles. So she's a pretty intense old lady when it comes to like really having a goal and sticking to it. She was born in 1887. She was married at 19. She had 11 kids with her husband, and she was in like a physically abusive marriage for many, many years. So it kind of felt like at one point she was kind of sick of being told what to do or living a certain way, and might have chosen to go on these long hikes because it was something that she wanted to do, and it was time for her to do what she wanted to do. In fact, it was kind of written like that at one point. It was basically saying she no longer had responsibilities to where she had to do something, so she wanted to do what she wanted to do. And that was, in her case, hiking the Appalachian Trail at 67. She didn't tell her kids she was going to do it. She just did it. Some people were very, very supportive along the way, and she met a lot of interesting characters that the book kind of talks about. Some people didn't support her because they didn't like the idea of an elderly woman doing long hikes by herself. And I think it's notable that she didn't ever really say all that much about why she wanted to do it or what she was doing. And I think the action kind of spoke for itself. She wanted to do something that was meaningful for her, just for her, and not for everyone else in her life. And she just had the tenacity and stubbornness to do it. So I found her story very interesting. The biography itself I thought was okay. It was good. Obviously, I got to learn a lot about her. There was after halfway through into the biography, the biographer, which I'll have his name up here, I don't remember it, kind of starts inserting himself into the story, which is a little weird. Definitely could have been a little bit shorter with just focusing on her, maybe 50 pages less. I didn't really need the biographer in the story, so I mean, if you want to pick it up, just know that happens at some point, but the story of the lady herself was really interesting to read. This last book I already talked about on my channel once, but I'll talk about it again because I did read it for this purpose, and that was my romance pick, which is Our Souls at Night. Now, this isn't really perfect as a romance pick. It's also sort of a literary fiction, but it follows a widow and a widower who choose to spend time together late in their life for companionship purposes. They start sleeping in the same house and just talking about what they've been through in life and reflecting on what their life has been up to this point. It's about friendship and companionship and being there for each other before they were feeling very lonely because obviously their spouses passed away and all of that. In addition to the story of companionship turning into a little bit of a light romance, we have a little bit of an exploration of social dynamics with this type of event occurring. The woman's son is not a fan of her relationship in her older years because for so many years she was so loyal to her husband and all of that. And it was sort of the idea that she felt that she was sort of expected to sit around and wait to die because at this point she wasn't supposed to do anything else with her life. And it's just an interesting exploration of what that sort of might feel like when you're actually in that situation from the other side, which of course none of us get to know about until we are potentially there. It did make me think that we shouldn't have elevated moral and social obligations for elderly people just because they're old. And it's unfortunate if sometimes we do. Anyway, that was my project. Let me know down in the comments if you have read any books recently that had an elderly protagonist. I know I threw one middle-aged protagonist in here too. Sorry about that. But if you have any book recommendations that fit this topic, put that down in the comments.